people who served militarily in Afghanistan since 2001, what are your thoughts on the current events, and therefore the previous 20 years? Serious. Attention. Serious. Tag notice. Jokes, puns, and off-topic comments are not permitted in any comment, parent or child. Parent comments that aren't from the target group will be removed, along with their child replies. Report comments that violate these rules. Posts that have few relevant answers within the first hour, and posts that are not appropriate for the serious tag will be removed. Consider doing an AMA request instead. Thanks for your cooperation and enjoy the discussion. I am a bot, and this action was performed automatically. Please contact the moderators of this subreddit if you have any questions or concerns. Served 2 stints over there. I'm sad for the people who were optimistic that better days were ahead, but I also don't know of a solution that doesn't involve a permanent U.S. military presence. The situation was pretty much fucked from the beginning. There was never a realistic plan. On one of my deployments I became friends with a Lebanese man who managed some of the workers on base. He told me that Americans think the world wants to be America, when most countries just want to be left to chart their own course. His words came back to me today watching Kabul. He told me that Americans think the world wants to be America, when most countries just want to be left to chart their own course. His words came back to me today watching Kabul. I had a coworker several years ago insisting that all these other countries should be grateful for the things we give them, and I responded, did they ask for those things? Were they actually even useful to them? Didn't matter. He was just focused on how we were sharing our innate awesomeness. It was falsely sold to the public as a hunt for bin Laden. Had that been the truth, it would have been led by the intelligence services, and then once they had a good idea of where he was in Afghanistan, send in the Navy SEALs or, even better, the SAS. But he fled the country as huge numbers of coalition forces arrived and probably laughed at them as they made a huge mess of what they were doing there, taking casualties every day. Mass boots on the ground was never going to be a good idea. I spent just over 4 years there as both military and a civilian. I understand the process of how we got there, why we did all the things we did, and ultimately why we failed. And I also understand the sunken cost bias and the need to break ties with Afghanistan in a definitive manner. However, this feels awful. This feels not only wasteful, but disrespectful in a soul-shaming manner, both to the Americans we sent there, and the people there who believed in us. So much fail. It's hard to comprehend. It's just so sad seeing all the thousands of people trying to flee, knowing that there are hundreds of girls and women who are now being enslaved by the Taliban. This was the obvious outcome since the moment the withdrawal was announced. I'm utterly stunned, and I'm not even a veteran, and I don't know if it's immense sadness or anger, but the initial reason we went in, the threat of terrorism, has now returned as the training camps will soon reconstitute. How soon until we have to intervene again? There's an emotional trigger that I keep stumbling over. On the one hand, you have the practical matters. No, we couldn't prop up an expensive client state forever. Yes, there's plenty of blame to go around, and picking a side is pointless. No, Afghanistan was never going to be a success by any definition, not if they folded like a lawn chair the second the Americans pulled out. But the actual and the moment reality of it feels very different. Right now, the front page of Reddit is wallpapered with images of that plane taking off with Afghanis clinging to the outside. Obviously that's going to live in a very different part of the brain than the political reality that got us here. I'm sure we had a genuine and workable moral rationale for pulling out of Vietnam, as well, but all anyone remembers is the helicopter on the roof of the embassy in Saigon. As a civilian who cares a lot about culture and organization, I kind of feel like there was no amount of money and effort the U.S. could have invested in Afghanistan that would have worked, given the chosen strategy. It's to your credit that you feel responsible, but clearly the Afghans don't feel responsible for themselves. It's worth restating, Americans and other foreigners are more willing to die in the interest of Afghanistan than Afghans are. It's ludicrous, and I have no sympathy for anyone who tries to put the blame on the Americans for not wanting to keep paying someone else's bills. You don't go into business with someone who has no stake in the business and expect them to take things as seriously as you do. The strategy from day one should have been to put people in power according to how incorruptible they are, not how friendly they are towards the West. Bah, I dunno, maybe it can't be done in Afghanistan. To answer for my stepdad, since he doesn't use this kind of thing, he honestly doesn't care anymore. He lost plenty of friends, still has trouble with loud booms, babies or pets crying, and some random other things. He doesn't talk about his time serving, and generally is antisocial. He just wants to be alone, and politics or news like this mean nothing anymore. Kandahar 2008 to 2009. Keep in mind a couple of things. The primary mission aim was to prevent Afghanistan being used as a training, staging ground for international terrorists. That aim was met, and the new Taliban have promised to uphold that. This iteration of the Taliban isn't the OG Taliban who formed under Mullah Omar, and they aren't the narco thug Taliban who sprang up when Bush took his eye off the ball to go invade Iraq. These new guys are more political, and use the name Taliban more as a term for those who oppose the government than as a symbol of allegiance to the principles of Mullah Omar. Exactly what they see a future Afghanistan looking like is still in question. When we came into the country, we had to find the people willing to work with us. But Afghanistan, particularly in the south, is massively tribal, and people have long memories. Just by working with Tribe P, we made enemies of Tribe A. No matter what good we did, no matter how many wells dug or schools built or whatever, Tribe A was going to hate us because we made nice with Tribe P, and that's before you layer on the foreign infidel aspect. We were never going to be loved by everyone. We did, however, massively improve the quality of life for the average Afghan, and demonstrated to thousands of people that it didn't have to be a hellhole. A lot, and I mean a lot of good was done, and I expect that a bunch of it will survive. The Taliban have been making promises about how women will continue to go to school and such, although I don't think they are all on the same page there. So I don't expect this iteration of Taliban rule to be anything like what the OG Omar's boys were like. I'm hoping this is more fall of Saigon, where it is Afghanistan sorting out its future. A whole lot of scores are about to be settled, and a lot of bad shit is going to happen near term. Hell, our people would kill each other over fuel contracts, changing suppliers. People who were on the outs while we were working with their tribal enemies are going to exact their revenge. And it is going to be ugly. But I hope that the leadership will try and clamp down on the worst excesses. Although it might take a while. I do not know why the ANA rolled over so quickly. I suspect their leadership saw the current government as illegitimate and not worth supporting. Maybe this is the start of a grassroots political movement that sees themselves as free of foreign influence. Maybe this is their take on the American War of Independence. Which in a way would be awful, because it was so fucking unnecessary. They could have joined the regular political process anytime they wanted. But it's hard to teach that to people who are fixated on blowing up foreigners. My deepest hope is that this is Vietnam after Saigon falls, or Rwanda post-genocide. That is the start point that leads to genuine nation building and the establishment of a native Afghan government seen as legitimate by the whole country, and that the skills we taught in terms of security and governance get put to good use, maybe not how we envisioned, and maybe not by our people. But if the new state is a responsible Afghan government that continues to not allow or sponsor international terrorism, ultimately it's a win. A messy, ugly, expensive, and deeply unsatisfying win. I guess we will see. My deepest hope is that this is Vietnam after Saigon falls, or Rwanda post-genocide. That is the start point that leads to genuine nation building and the establishment of a native Afghan government seen as legitimate by the whole country. I wholeheartedly agree with you here. Afghanistan can do with some stability, even if it comes from the Taliban. I just sincerely hope women are allowed to study, work, and accorded at least the basic human rights. A lot of good points. I think there were a handful of videos the Taliban shared of private residences of military generals. Full of gold and luxury, TVs, cars. In regards to where did all the money go? So the Anna was rotting from the inside already, but those 20 years of influence hopefully planted some seeds in the population, even if just in those from the cities. A whole generation of people who may already be parents themselves grew up under the foreign influence. Also not just US influence. Up until 2020 it was troops from 36 countries. If anything, it showed how different cultures could live door to door. I wasn't in Afghanistan, but a close relative did numerous stints as aircraft mechanic for the German Air Force. It wasn't a waste. There is a reason that the Taliban prevents its women from being educated, because it cannot be undone. They cling desperately to their authoritarian prohibitions, gripping the bull by the horns to keep women perpetually in the dark, day by day, year by year, knowing that if any of their women become educated, it will spread. You couldn't protect those girls forever. You couldn't stop the inevitable withdrawal of the US, the resurgence of the Taliban, or the backward, tribal beliefs in the region. But for one brief moment in their lives, you gave those girls the gift of a light in the dark. If not for you, they would have lived their entire lives in the darkness, as uneducated slaves. Instead of having the world illuminated for that short time, they would only ever have traded hushed dreams with their sisters, huddled in the dark. But because of you, they got to see. You weren't able to give those girls the gift of a full, Western life, but you gave them a gift nonetheless, of a brief flash of light where they could see the world, of dreams, of careers, of growth, a childhood where they were allowed to see what might be. Because of you, they are not the blind, beaten women the Taliban knows how to control, women who are tamed because they don't know any better. The Taliban wanted them, needed them, to be in the dark forever. You were only able to provide that one spark of light, for a short time, but that cannot be undone. We went in because the Taliban would not hand over bin Laden. He's dead now. After that, what were our conditions for victory? We assisted the Northern Alliance to just march down and kick out the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. Then what? The Afghani government had 20 years to cobble together a country. How much longer did they need? 5, 10, 100. As a country, we can't even agree to help our poorest, but we want to invest more in a country where we have no mission? I'm torn. 20 years. Over 2K service members gone. Over 2K families who only have pictures and video to remember them by. Mathematically speaking, that's 100 deaths a year for peace. Worth it? Should we wait and let more die so we don't fail? Should we have just nuked the country into a glass monument and prove to be the monsters they made us out to be? It's a situation where there is no correct option. Stay. We have to sink billions, trillions more and lose more lives for a country who just can't come together. Leave. Anything gained is in the past tense. It's just a sucky call all around. I remember W saying that we'd be over there only 6 months. I knew that to be a lie the moment I heard it. I was the only person at work who thought going over there was a bad idea. And exactly, what were the conditions for victory? Even with bin Laden alive, the Taliban were still a force, and that wasn't going to change no matter what the US did. In fact, this country, by eliminating him, probably martyred him and thus enabled the Taliban to grow. I honestly believe that the US government escalated things on purpose to destabilize the Middle East, have an excuse to insert themselves and profit from the long-term mess. I believe this because, 1, they knew nobody over there would hand over bin Laden, even if they were US sympathizers. They're the people who live there, and if bin Laden would have been given away, it's them who would be the ones to be subjected to the direct consequences of pissing off an insane extremist group. And the US government isn't stupid. They know that demand would be met with a refusal. I mean, FFS, if a country demands you snitch on the guy whose army can march into your town within a matter of a few hours and level it to the ground, you're gonna stay silent. 2. I refuse to believe that a country such as the US, who spends such an insane amount of time and money annually into the military and intelligence gathering, would have no alternative ways of finding bin Laden and taking him down on their own without making such a huge international mess. I'm not saying it would be easy, What I am saying, however, that white flag operations are nothing new to the US. I do have to chalk this one uphill, mostly incredulity, so I won't take this point too seriously. 3. After bin Laden was gone, they refused to leave, to the point where the military themselves, as evidenced by you, were scratching their heads and wondering why the fuck you're not going back home already, or why you're not given a nuclear mission. The US literally could not come up with a good excuse to stay, but stayed anyway. Follow-up question for people: is there any way, after we invaded, you could have seen this not turn out this way? Could this have been a fruitful nation-building exercise if we had tried something different? Is this an issue with American military leadership or administrative, engineering strategy? Did the Afghan people simply feel lukewarm at best to our idea of liberal democracy, and it would just never be the sort of thing they'd be motivated to defend in the long run? I was 7 when we invaded the country and obviously had no say in that choice. But I'm wondering if moving forward I as a voter need to learn lessons from this. The issue was never with the military leadership of the US, but more to do with administrative ignorance and lack of a clear vision and goal. Additionally, President Bush had a grudge against Saddam Hussein's Iraq and used the war on terror as an excuse to invade, to go looking for Iraq's weapons of mass destruction, which didn't exist. Bush's CIA, State Department, etc. all assured him that Iraq was building WMDs without any proof whatsoever, because that's what the boss wanted to hear. When the US invaded Iraq, Afghanistan got sidelined so hard it wasn't even in the stadium anymore. It wasn't sexy enough for the big dogs in Washington to care about, because big flashy fighting was happening in Iraq. Afghanistan was boring because the Taliban government had been toppled in weeks and US troops were sweeping up the last hillbillies out in the mountains. Not sexy at all like Iraq with its tanks and air force and stuff. So Afghanistan was forgotten, and no serious nation building was implemented. Any national government that was set up in Afghanistan was set up with the sole purpose of serving their American overlords and delivering a steady supply of Taliban, Al-Qaeda captives, not a government that was ready for independence. Also, Pakistan sucks. I highly recommend reading Steve Cole's Ghost Wars to understand how the US and CIA first got involved with Afghanistan. Q's communism. Then read his Directorate S, which is everything from 9/11 to 2018. Could this have been a fruitful nation-building exercise if we had tried something different? You could have done it by simply propping it up long enough for cultural change to happen. So another couple generations. Otherwise the only way would be to come in like conquerors. Half the reason who progress in Afghanistan was slow was because it was all about finding allies, which meant making deals with a lot of bad people. Just look at women's rights. NATO walked in and made some negotiations with the male leaders about how many rights the women should get. The women were still oppressed, just not as oppressed. The tribal communities were kept, etc. That's a long-term, slow and gradual change plan. That shit takes a long time. If you want to speedrun it like we, ISAF, apparently wanted to do, then the only way to do that is overwhelming brutality. You go in, set the new rules, and massacre anyone who complains. Force everyone to send their kids to school and make sure the schools are filled with the right propaganda. Then you could do it in maybe 30 years, because you just take complete control over the youth. That's the only way to do it quickly. I did 5 years total of active duty, 2001 through 2006. I was in boot camp when the towers fell, watched 2 wars unfold, and got out. My entire enlistment was spent non-combative/non-deployable, though I ended up staying 5 days in Afghanistan as part of W's visit in 2006. The Afghan war gave me 2 months of tax-exempt status, a shitty medal I had to wear, and a fucked up couple of friends. It left me untouched. I'm not a fucking war hero, but when I was in, I lamented that I was missing out on the action. which was a stupid and childish desire. Now that I'm 15 years removed from the situation, I think the war was all bullshit. I'm proud of my service and I love the brothers and sisters I served with, but I am glad I never went over to fight. I've read enough books and listening to enough podcasts to have opened my eyes to the bullshit that was going on in the background leading up to the war. It just feels like a lot of old men sending young men off to die so we can keep the U.S. military-industrial complex running at a high pace. High cost. America won the Cold War and was left with a large military with no real adversaries. No politician is going to scale back the military, regardless of need. Going back to the invasion of Panama, it just feels like we were doing dumb shit to justify a bloated military budget.